You know, there's a certain question out there that mankind has been asking itself for a long time. We're talking like tens of thousands of years, right? It's honestly the original question, the quintessential question, if you will. And the question is quite simple. How many swords is the correct number of swords to wield? A lot of answers to that, a lot of opinions. Only one correct answer, of course. There's been entire gatherings, they gather thousands of people all over the world together in one spot to debate this. How many swords is the appropriate number? We need to figure this stuff out. And some people came up and they were like, you know what? One sword. One sword is good enough. You don't want to have it too unruly. Let's just keep it the simple answer. Other people popped up and they're like, hey, we have two hands. Two-handed, species, maybe two swords is the correct number. Some of the numbers even got up to 8, and then you get ridiculous numbers like, hundreds of swords, thousands of swords. There's no limit to the number of swords, and so the debate raged on for days, guys. We're talking weeks, just deadlocked, until finally, one man woke up from his nap, and that man was Roanoa Zoro. He stood up and declared 3 swords. 3 swords is the correct number. And at that moment, everybody immediately shut up, got out of their seats, left, got ice cream, and went home. Because the debate was over. It's 3 swords. 3 swords is the correct number. Yes! Okay, hey everybody, how you doing? Tekking and Barry here today. I feel like it's been a while since we had a good old-fashioned Zoro video, you know what I mean? So we're gonna be doing that today, and of course, we gotta talk about Zoro's special sword style, Santoryu. 3 sword style. Very simple, very basic. Let me just ask you right out of the gate, because, a lot of crazy stuff happens in One Piece, a lot of crazy stuff happens in anime in general. If One Piece was like your first introduction to anime, did anybody think it was a little weird that he uses 3 swords, that he uses one in his mouth? Maybe a little goofy at first. I remember I was watching the 4Kids dub when I was like 12 years old with one of my friends, and I'm like, well, what did you think? Because even though it was the 4Kids dub, even at that age, I was still kind of like okay with it. I was like, well, I think the theme song is cool. He's Zoro, he's Zolo, he's like a samurai. And I remember one of my friends was like, I liked it, it was cool, but, there's no way a person could actually swing a sword with his mouth. That might actually have been, in fact, the first time in my life someone has seriously critiqued anime in like a realistic perspective. That's the moment right there I decided what I was gonna do with my life. Like, wait a second, how does he swing a sword with his mouth? I think I'm going to do a YouTube channel about that, Okay, so, let me know what your first impressions were when you found out what Zoro's, sword style was in very early One Piece when he got the 3 swords and like 1, 2, and then pop the 3rd one in his mouth and just start spinning around like crazy. It'd be like, well, it's effective, it works, right? So today we're going to be talking about Santoryu, and it just so happens, very fortunately, there's a new Japanese restaurant that opened up near me called Santoryu Sushi, and I have the menu here, and it's fabulous. Look at all these delicious options. You got onigiri, you got yaki onigiri, you got toragari, you got ushibari, 1,080 poundo! Delicious options. You got the time skip menu over here, it's great. Rengoku onigiri, that's, if you want the Rengoku onigiri challenge, you gotta bring an appetite, you know what I mean? So, yeah, Santoryu, Zoro has other styles he utilizes, and in the broader scope of One Piece, there's even more swords out there. There's more sword styles out there, even upwards of 3. Kaku utilizes the Yontoryu, or the 4 sword style. Zoro, I think, he gets to the number that's like just good enough. You go any more than 3, it just starts getting ridiculous. You had Kaku using 2 swords, and then he used his Rankyaku, his storm kicks, his tempest kicks as the other 2 blades. There's a lot of stuff going on there. Hachi, okay, it made sense. After all, Hachi is an octopus. But Zoro, I think 3 is great. Now, he does have some really epic Itoryu, or 1 sword style techniques. I love, Lion's Song, the technique he used to defeat Mr. 1. That was a beautiful one. He also used it to decapitate a dragon at Punk Hazard, so how could you not like that? Nitoryu, I like the Nigiri techniques where he takes the swords, kind of goes parallel here, with this, and then he uses, like, the climbing tower techniques. He used that against Kaku. Also Rashomon, probably my favorite Nitoryu technique, probably his strongest Nitoryu technique. But the thing is, at the end of the day, 1 sword That's the standard, okay? Nothing really crazy with that. Usually Zoro uses the EI techniques with his one sword style when he's like, okay, I really need to drop this guy, or like the finishing blow, okay? But Itoryu is really not that different because that's basically all swordsmen in this world. I mean, there are, swordsmen that specialize in two swords here in our world, but you have to have very specific swords for that, like those Chinese hook swords and things. Samurai would usually use the daisho, the big small, so they'd have a katana, but they would also have like a smaller wakizashi or like a tanto. That's the style that Shunsui Kyoraku uses in Bleach. So you'd have like very specific styles with that, but it doesn't get more than 2 in our world. So then you get to 3, and I could see Zoro being a young kid and just being like seeing most people using one sword. And little kid Zoro is like, yeah, okay, one sword is good, but I want to do better. And he sees maybe a few other people practicing 2-sword style. Like, well, Zoro, you could practice 2-sword style. It's a little bit more difficult to master, but you'd be twice as effective. And then Zoro's like, wait a second, I don't see anybody using 3 swords. He's like, well, where would you put the 3rd sword at? Would you just shove it in your mouth? And he's like, oh man, I was gonna shove it in my butt cheeks, but mouth, yeah, that works too. Okay, 3 swords. We're doing 3 swords from now on. How does one exactly train up your jaw for that? Like, every time I see Zoro use Santoryu, I'm just like, oh my god, that's gotta hurt so bad. It's gotta chip your teeth. I chipped a tooth 2 weeks ago eating soup, for God's sake, and Zoro's swinging freaking katanas around, throwing up twisters, leveling buildings. Look at this! He literally has a technique. It's called Daibutsugiri, Buddha Cutter, where he literally jumps on top of a building, then shing, 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 and then slices the whole thing, and then Sanji uses it as a Jenga cannon. So yeah, that's literally a technique he has. I think that's the first Santoryu technique he uses after acquiring Shusui, in fact, at Thriller Bark, okay? So he's doing that crazy stuff. I'm like, man, you see him training on the Sunny, you see him like lifting giant barbells with like his arms, and then maybe lifting them with his feet, but then you also see Zoro take I don't lift very often, but I have like this, I have a 10-pound barbell over here, just the idea of like, just the idea of doing that and like, gotta train, getting strong now. Like, you go to the freaking gym, right? I walk into the gym and it'd be like, hey there, how you doing? What part of your body do you really want to work on? What's the area you want to get stronger? I'd be like, I'm thinking my jaw. I'm thinking my jaw. I want the strongest jaw, I want to be able to swing a giant stone pillar in my mouth if I really have to, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, okay, sure. But it's a beautiful style, and whenever he does use Santoryu, you get these really neat acrobatic scenes in the manga of Zoro, like, jumping around and stuff, like the streaming wolf swords technique. That's really cool, where Zoro has all 3 swords out, and he's, like, dancing elegantly through the barrage of attacks, and then he just, like slashes his opponent from behind. Oh my god, it's beautiful, right? This is Enma, of course, his newest sword in Santoryu, so Zoro is back in action. I'm waiting to see some new Santoryu techniques in the battle at Onigashima with Kaido and the Calamities against King. That's gonna be beautiful. But for today, let's just go down this list. Let's go down this veritable menu, and the joke here is a lot of Zoro's techniques are puns. Some of them are puns based off Japanese cuisine, like, for example, onigiri could just mean rice ball. Yaki onigiri is like blazing rice ball. There's Toragari, which is tiger hunter. There is, of course, Tatsumaki, which anybody that watches One Punch Man knows what Tatsumaki is. Actually, it's a double pun because it can mean like a tornado, but it can also mean a cut of sushi in Japan. So there's a lot of puns. Some of the references are not so much puns; they're references to Buddhist cosmology or Buddhist, like legends and stuff. Like, for example, the 36, 72, 108, those are all references to, those are really important numbers in Buddhism, okay? And of course, Zoro has references to that. He can summon a freaking Asura demon from behind him to do 9-sword style. But today we're only talking about his 3-sword styles, okay? And you'll forgive me, I'm not really trained in that art so well. But first, let's start with probably his signature attack. It's not nearly his strongest, but it is the one that when he busts out, you know you're in trouble. It's like, if he busts this attack out on you, he kind of like, you earned his respect, so to speak. He doesn't just bust this out on anybody. Well, he kind of does. Okay. This is the Onigiri, okay? It's also known as like the demon or the ogre cutter or rice ball, okay? And it's very, very simple. He takes 2 swords in his hand, 1 in his mouth, and he just kind of like crosses them like this, and he just rushes at the opponent and then just slashes them at once with all 3 attacks. He uses this technique very early on in the story. One of the first techniques we get to see. He uses this to defeat Kabaji at Orangetown. He used this against Mihawk, which, by the way, if maybe at the beginning of East Blue, if you thought Zoro's techniques were like, oh, these are a little goofy, him having a sword in his mouth and swinging it around, everything like that, yeah, you probably shut up by the time you get to the Mihawk fight. That's when you realize, okay. So, yeah, that's a scene where he uses Onigiri against Mihawk, and he goes to, like, clash with him, and Mihawk just takes out his little knife, his little pendant, his necklace knife, and he just, like, stops the attack, because there is a point when Zoro is swinging all 3 swords, when all 3 swords, like, intersect at the same point, and then Mihawk, using his mighty hawk eyes, could sense when that point is, and he just takes out his knife and just blocks the attack right there. But Onigiri, there's a bunch of different variations of Onigiri. There's the Yaki Onigiri, which was more of an improvisational technique. It's not something he planned, but when they were at Little Garden and they were encased in wax, which Zoro, he's like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to be trapped in wax for all eternity. He tries slicing off his own legs, but that doesn't work. So he's like, well, that didn't work. Might as well die in an epic pose. So he, like, poses with his sword like this. And it's just like, hey, Vivi and Nami, they didn't strike a pose. Nami is forever frozen like this. Vivi is forever frozen like this. Freaking Zoro, though. Boss move, Zoro. So anyway, Zoro, he, after Usopp lights the whole thing on fire with his oil and the wax melts, you got Nami coming off without a shirt on with just a bra. That's one thing. But then also you have Zoro jumping out with flaming swords. Oh my god, that was so cool. Right? And just, boom, slices down Mr. 5. And Zoro's just kind of like, he acts like of course he didn't plan that. He was just like, 1 second he was like unconscious, encased in wax. And the next thing he knows, he's, like, melting, and then there's fire everywhere, and he's like, flaming swords, okay. And he just jumps out and slices down the first person he sees. And he's like, man, these flaming swords are pretty cool, right? And that's, I think, the only time in the story Zoro has utilized burning swords. He is referencing, like, demons a lot of time, because you see Zoro with the red eyes and everything, like, doo-doo-doo, like a demon behind him. You think like the flaming swords would be, well, no, he did use that heat technique against Ryuma. I think that's the only other time. That was a 1-sword style technique. That was Blaze, where he like swings his sword so damn fast it just ignites, kind of in probably a similar principle to Luffy's Red Hawk, okay? But that was 1-sword style, but I think the Yaki Onigiri is the only Santoryu style he's used that with the flaming swords, right? It's funny, too, because later on during Skypiea, remember when Usopp gets all the dials and he goes up to Zoro and he's just like, man, I could use these dials, Zoro. I could make your sword smell like freshly cut melon or whatever, give off very pleasant scents. But if you think about it, if Zoro is probably not one for all the modifications. He's a very simple swordsman, okay? He doesn't need anything fancy. He doesn't need like a special electric sword or anything like that. But through the powers of dials, he could get that. He could get an electric sword. He could get, Usopp could attach a heat dial to his blade and have it like heat up at super hot so the blade like slices and cauterizes at the same time. He could get a flaming sword, he could attach a jet dial to the end of it so it's like, jet cutter or something like that. Like, he could technically do that, but Zoro's like, nah, I don't need anything like that. And hey, if I want to swing my sword at the speed of sound, I'll just train to the point where I could swing my sword at the speed of sound. Usopp, I don't need any fancy seashells mounted to the damn thing. That'll just slow me down. And how am I even going to sheath a sword with a giant seashell attached to it? It's just not practical. I beat up the dude that had the magical iron cloud. Whatever. I don't need anything fancy. Just give me a nice chunk of metal. I'll be able to make do, okay? So, excuse me, that's Onigiri. And there's one more variation he uses. There's a lot of upgraded versions we use throughout the story, but during Eni's lobby, that's when the Straw Hats kind of get their level ups. That's when Luffy gets his gears. That's when Sanji gets his Diabu Jumbe. And that's when Zoro, well, first he unlocks the Sage King sword, which, a lot of people debate what is Zoro's strongest sword, or what's your favorite sword that Zoro had. The Wado is a staple. He always has the Wado. And, the Sandai Katetsu, Cursed Blade, that's something to go on there. there. Right now he's got Enma, one of the blades that was used by Kozuki Oden, one of the only 2 swords that's ever scarred Kaido of the Beast himself. Shusui was really cool. I personally like Yubashiri, but my favorite by far is the long-nosed sword of Sogeking, or whatever he called it. That was beautiful. That was absolutely marvelous. That was a Sideshow OO Wazamono. A great, great, great sword right there. But no, he also upgrades with the Ashura, the 9-sword style, the Kyutoryu there. But another technique he utilized while they were raiding the courthouse was Enbima Yonezu Onigiri, which is essentially kind of the same exact technique as regular onigiri, just a lot more terrifying, because Zoro apparently has access to like a demon dimension, like there's some kind of ogre living inside of him. That wouldn't surprise me, because it's like he doesn't really do anything different with onigiri. It's the same stance. He does the same stance with the swords. You know, he does this with the onigiri, has a sword in his mouth, and then the swords just kind of start to bend and warp. Like the air around him is just, you know, being shifted. So the blades begin to, like, you know, twist and contort. And then a freaking cloaked demon appears behind Zoro that everybody can apparently see. And is like, whoa. And then like, ah! And then if you don't pass out immediately, or if you don't die of a heart attack, just right there, Zoro just bursts through and slices y'all down en masse right there. So I guess if anything, that's an extension of maybe Zoro's like hockey right there, or it's just an attack. It's like onigiri, but designed for a larger crowd. That's the best I got. But yeah, that technique is just absolutely terrifying. You know, maybe that's also a prelude to what we would get later in the arc when he fought against Kaku and we got the Ashura. You know, at the beginning of the story, Oda was kind of throwing it out that like, oh yeah, Zoro is like he's like a demon. You know, he tamed the cursed blade, Sandai Katetsu. He's like a demon. But by the time we get to freaking Eni's lobby, Oda's like, no, like, he's not like a demon. Like, he's seriously a demon. Like, he can turn into a 9-armed god, deity, demon, and, like, slice you down, like, easy. So that's that. So then we have Toragari, which is Tiger Hunt. This is a cool one. I remember he used this on the Nyambon brothers at Syrup Village. So this one, it's kind of complicated to mimic Zoro's techniques. He's trained a lot, and I'm just an amateur in comparison. I would let Barry do it, but, you know, being a brick and all. Anyway, so Toragari is pretty cool. He, like, takes 2 swords, goes back like this, with his one sword horizontal here in his mouth, and he kind of does this cool spin through the air and basically just brings them down and kind of like traps the opponent while slicing them at the same time. Very, very impactful technique there. Very terrifying to be caught in. There's also a similar technique that's named after a crab, but as a big fan of the giant robotic crab theory, I'm glad that Zoro has a technique named after a crab. This is, of course, Gazami Dori, and I think he only uses it a single time. It's one of the techniques that he uses. He just unloads on Mr. 1, because Mr. 1 is obviously, he has the Supa no Mi. He's made of steel and he can make blades everywhere. And so when Zoro starts fighting him, he's like busting out all of his techniques, trying to like bust through his defenses. So he tries, you know, Gazami Dori and like bull needles and everything, and tries like, just onigiri, just tries to run through Mr. 1. But no matter what he does, even though Zoro can like, you know, knock him back, or, you know, do the tiger trap thing and like hit him and like knock him down or something, and like he can like trap Mr. 1 in between the blades, but the blades aren't actually cutting him because he's made of steel, until Zoro could, you know, improve his hockey a little bit there in that fight, what we later find out, and then uses a one-sword style technique, Lion Song, to slice him down, right? So we see him bust out a bunch of these techniques against Mr. 1 there. That was also Ushibari, the bull needles. That's a cool one. That's a cool one where Zoro jumps up and he's like, bull needles! And just coming at you like that. That's pretty damn cool. Tatsumaki, that's the technique he uses to defeat Hachan. That's cool. I also really love in the manga, they use it in the anime too, but I just like the artwork more in the manga, especially the digitally colored manga. Whenever Zoro is about to use a technique named after an animal, he takes the position like Santoryu, and then in the background Oda draws like a silhouette of the animal. So if it's like the crab, it's like Gazami Dori and there's a silhouette of a crab, or he has another technique named after a leopard. Hyokindama, a leopard will appear behind him when he uses those techniques. Actually, he uses the leopard technique during Eni's lobby, the same arc that, Lucci is in, well, he uses his leopard fruit, so I thought that was kind of funny. But he doesn't use it against Lucci, he uses it against Kaku, actually, the leopard technique. So yeah, I just like the design in the background, like whenever he's like, Tatsumaki. So this is a Dragon Twister, okay? This is basically Dragon Tornado, and you see a dragon behind him, Zoro, of course, and also, even if you read Santoryu, it does have Ryu in it, which can be read as dragon, so there you go, right? So essentially, Zoro has to take down Kaido with Santoryu. It has to happen, right? So yeah, Tatsumaki is pretty cool, though. It's very simple in the way. He just takes all 3 swords and just spins really fast, and that creates a death spiral, hurricane, tornado that just completely shreds the opponent. Best effectiveness of this technique is when the opponent, like, is in the air, like, Zoro knocks him in the air, and they're above of him, and they're like, I'm gonna slice you down from above, Zoro. No, you're not. Tatsumaki! And then just swirls really fast, and then creates just a torrent of air. Even early on in the story, Zoro has techniques, even before he gets to Skypiea, and he gets, like, the 36-pounder hole, and he gets the different techniques with that, Zoro still has, like, capabilities of shooting air pressure blades at people. Like, so Tatsumaki is an example of that. He also has a Nitoryu style called Hawk Wave, which is just basically like a really big burst of air, knock down a bunch of people at Whiskey Peak. And then it wasn't until Skypiea that he really started to figure out, like, wait, I can get projectile techniques with my swords. So, 1 sword style is 36, 2 sword style is 72, and then 3 sword style is the 108 caliber Phoenix, or the 108 Poundo, and of course, when he gets, after the time skip, he upgrades each one of those to 360, 720, and then 1080 Poundo! So really cool projectile techniques that Zoro's got there in his disposal. Toro Nagashi, I already mentioned that one. That one is the Streaming Wolf Swords. Very good, very handy technique to have whenever an opponent is attacking you from a bunch of different angles. He uses this against Hachi. So Hachi has all the swords coming at him, all the swords attacking him at once, and then Zoro can basically just use these Streaming Wolf Swords for one part to, like, acrobatically move. And keep in mind, Zoro still had a giant scar on his chest from when he fought Mihawk, so losing a lot of blood even at this point, but he was able to, like, expertly, like, acrobatically dodge all of Hachi's attacks, and then Streaming Wolf Swords, and then slices them up close and then moves behind him. So really cool technique there with the Streaming Wolf Swords. Let's see, Karasuma Gari, that's named after a crow. He also has another one called Yashagarasu, which is like Demon Crow. I love that move. That move is freaking awesome. So he uses that after he gets Shusui. He uses that at Thriller Bark against Oars, alright? So basically he, like, jumps up. He first takes 2 swords, and then, because remember, Oars is a big boy. He's pretty big. Takes his swords, drives them into Oars' hand so he can kind of get a foothold or get a handhold on Zoro's arm, and then he jumps up. And then Zoro takes all 3 of his swords, 2 swords like this, and then he takes his 3rd sword, he kind of positions it like this, so it's facing up. So all 3 of his swords kind of make, like, sort of like Ite Gumo, sort of like Isane Zanpakuto from Bleach. So you have 3 swords here, but they're also in the shape of, like, a crow's talon or a crow's foot. And then he just spins, like a magical wonder ball. He just spins with that position in, which is kind of difficult to get the 3rd sword, like, straight up like that. Then he just spins up Oars' arm, like, ah! And then, like, just leaves imprints of, like, the swords, or, like, the demon crow, like, the Yatagarasu's crow talons into freaking Oars' arm. And then after the attack is finished, and he's finished spinning, blood just spurts out of each one of the crow imprints. And it's just, that's crazy. It's just such a weird technique, but it's, like, it's effective. I wish he would actually use that again, because that was really cool. Daibutsugiri, I talked about that one. That's more of a combination technique, honestly, with Sanji, because the technique itself he doesn't use on Oars. He jumps on top of a tall building on Thriller Bark, Daibutsugiri, Buddha Cutter, and then slices the building into, like, giant chunks, and then Sanji uses Jenga Cannon, which is just, he just jumps up and just starts kicking the blocks as they fall, like, boom, 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 and just keeps launching them at Oars. That was an awesome move. That was a cool combination attack. You don't see that many combos with Sanji and Zoro because, but that was really cool. There is one in particular, there's one 3-sword style technique I'm waiting to the very end to talk about. I'm just making sure I covered all the other ones. Oh yeah, okay. So the Nigori Zake. This is a technique that he utilizes. There's like a prerequisite technique he has to use. They're not technically Santoryu techniques. They're not even technically any sort of sword techniques because they're just Zoro literally flexing his muscles. Like, Zoro flexing his muscles has a technique name in of itself, and it's Ich Gorilla, boom, Ni Gorilla, boom, and so he just flexes his mighty biceps to the point where they're just like ridiculous. You know, like you ever go into like a store and like you see the magazines, like the bodybuilding magazines, and some of them have bodies that are like mountains, you know, just like, oh my god, that's just insane. And yeah, that's Zoro basically. He just like Popeye just a little bit further up and just boom, giant bicep. And then he takes his swords, Santoryu, Nigori Zake, and he uses that against Kaku. That's a crazy powerful technique. Just the power is amped up because this is his true power released. He doesn't really use the, he doesn't really need it anymore because Zoro's arms are thick enough already now after the time skip. His whole body got much thicker. But before that, he gets, like, I guess he could restrain his muscles when he really needs them and just boom! I mean, the dude look at these dumbbells that he lifts. These are not dumbbells. These are dumb buildings at this point that he is lifting, right? So at that point, you'd figure. Alright, so I think those are all. Oh, Gyuki Yuzume, that's Cow Demon. So kind of also going along with the whole demon idea, so that's Cow Demon. That's another technique he uses against Kaku there. But easily his strongest, and we're gonna get into time skip techniques in a second, but I wanted to leave, this is his strongest technique before the time skip, and he also has an upgraded version after the time skip, because a lot of these techniques, they're the same techniques after the time skip, they just get an upgrade in terms of, like, what they can do. Like, the upgraded form of Tatsumaki is Kokujo O Tatsumaki, which he does the twister, it just doesn't stop, it just keeps on going, and he uses that at Fishman Island, it's like, Kokujo O Tatsumaki! Spins, and it's like, what? It's not stopping? And like more of the fishmen get caught up, and it's like, when is this thing gonna stop? We're getting shredded in here. And Zoro's just kind of like, it'll stop when you reach the deepest pits of hell, you know. And then, oh, last chapter, well, not last chapter, last episode of One Piece, where Zoro fought against Kamazo, which was kind of the impetus for me even doing this video right now, was Rengoku Onigiri, where it's just the upgraded form of Onigiri, which is just, like, honestly, once again, I don't think there's anything different in terms of, like, the technique. Like, it's still the same stance. It's just adding haki to the swords and just attacking and just slicing down in one big attack. But the animation in the last episode, I loved it. I thought it was just, like, demonic, and just the animation, it's like, it gets so crazy when Zoro's moving so fast, and it just, like, shing, and he slices down Kamazo, which is absolutely ridiculous. But those are, like, the upgraded forms. Then we got, like the 1080 Pound-a-Ho, of course. But his strongest technique before the time skip is easily his Sanzen Sekai, 3,000 worlds. And I love this, because the first time we get a hint at this technique relatively early on in the story. When he's fighting Mihawk, he uses Onigiri, I think he uses Tiger Trap against him, and it doesn't work. And Zoro figures out pretty early on in the fight that he's basically screwed. Every time that he fights, every time he uses a technique against Mihawk, he either parries it or slices Zoro, you know, easily, and he just dodges the attack. It's not a big deal. So Zoro figures out, okay, this is Dracul Mihawk. This is the man that I need to defeat to become the strongest in the world. Okay, so there's no holding back against this guy. I used my Onigiri, he blocked that. I used Tiger Trap, he slashed me. I need to use my strongest technique if I even have a hope of cutting this guy down, right? So what he does is he takes two of his swords like this, and then he just starts spinning them. And I think when he was fighting against Mihawk, he spins them counterclockwise, and then later he just does clockwise. But it doesn't matter which way he spins them. He takes both of his swords, and then just starts spinning them in his hands. Just third one in his mouth. Santoryu Ogi! Sansen Sekai! And he goes to attack Mihawk, but Mihawk at that point is able to destroy both of Zoro's katanas, except for his Wado. Both of them shatter. And at that moment, Zoro, that's when he realizes the attack wasn't strong enough to even touch Mihawk. And so he doesn't like stagger, he doesn't fall down and fall and like, no, I lost. No, it's like, it's such an epic moment where Zoro attacks. Give it a second. All really badass sword attacks, you know, take a minute to take effect. And then the two katanas, the two unnamed katanas, we never really found out what the names were in his hands. They just shatter, they crack and break, except for the Wado. And then Zoro's just like, takes out the Wado, sheaths it, stands up, and is just like, he just like admits to Mihawk right there, like, I know I lost. That was my Santoryu Ogi. That was my secret technique. That was my strongest move. And you blocked it like it was nothing, and you broke 2 of my swords. I cannot go on. He just does this. Mihawk's like, what are you doing? He's like, scars on the back are a swordsman's shame. Yep, they sure are. Shing! And it is Mihawk slices. Well said, man! Shing! And then just slices down Zoro right there. And then, of course, we have the emotional moment. We're like, I'll never lose again! Is that okay, King of the Pirates? Luffy's like, yeah, sure. That's cool. That's cool. Never lose again. That's great. Yeah, cool. So, yeah, that was his strongest technique. But the thing is, we didn't really get to see what it was capable of because he used it against Mihawk. So it's like, you know, we didn't get to see the full effect. We don't get to see the full effect until Thriller Bark. Like, you know, several hundred chapters later, when they're facing off against a giant, ancient giant, huge dude. That is the first point after Mihawk where Zoro's like, maybe I should bust out that secret technique now. Yeah, you know, I went up against Kaku and that steel guy. He used all these other techniques to try to slice down Mr. One. He's like, nah, he's not worth the Ogi. You know, but Oars, giant dude. That'd be pretty cool to slice this guy down. And maybe he just used it more for just surface size. So then he uses the technique finally with Shusui. I think Zoro was just kind of itching to use a Santoryu, a big high-octane Santoryu move, because Yubashiri was broke for a long time before this. And he finally gets his hands on Shusui, and he's like, screw it. Ancient giant guy the size of a damn building, and I got a third sword again. I am going to use Santoryu Ogi, Sunsen Sakai! And just massively slices up Oars in just a splendid fashion. And this is still, the upgraded form of this is still, I would say, Zoro's strongest technique, easily, bar none. He might bust out another technique with Enma, or something like that in the fight at Onigashima, but for right now, this is his strongest technique, and it's, of course, Ichidai Sansen Daisen Sekai! Which is like the 3,000 folded world of the 3,000 worlds, you know? It's just 3,000 upon 3,000, the 3 millionth fold world, or whatever, you know? And so he uses this against Pika during Dressrosa, and granted, he couldn't always use the technique the same badass way he used it against Pika, because there was, like, Orlumbus helping him out, but just the scenario that led to this was amazing. Like, everything in this chapter was perfect, okay? So first off, you got Pika, literally has the stone assimilation fruit turned into a giant man mountain, like literally a man mountain, okay? And he's stomping toward King Riku, and the guy's huge, and Zoro's on the other side of town, and he's like, alright, I gotta come up with, like, different strategies here. And he's like, okay, here's the one I'm going with. You, giant bearded guy. And Orlumbus is like, yeah? He's like, I want you to throw me at that damn man mountain. He's like, okay, Admiral Killer Bowling! And he just, boom, chucks Zoro at him, and he's like, here we go! And Zoro takes out his swords, all that air pressure, he's like traveling, like breaking the sound barrier, and he's like adding hockey to both of his blades, spinning them while traveling at like the speed of sound, and he's like, Ichidai Sansen Daisen Sekai! And then slices an entire mountain, and then proceeds to use it again against Pika. It's such an amazing scene. Probably either number 2 or 3 in every Zoro moment, period. We know what number 1 is. We know what the number 1 best Zoro moment was. It even took number 1 in my best One Piece moments of all time poll that I did last year. I'm not going to tell you what it was because nothing happened. And I would say number 2 Zoro moment would also we could probably just do top 10 Zoro moments, honestly. But the number 2 moment, I'm hesitant to say that was it because the Mihawk moment, the moment where he's like crying and he's like, I'll never lose again. That's also a really high up there moment. But a good solid third is the Ichidai Sansen Daisen Sekai against freaking Pika. You know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, you know what I mean. Alright, so that's easily Zoro's strongest. Rokudo no Suji, which I believe is also another Santoryu Ogi, another secret technique of the Santoryu style. What? Do you need to have secret techniques, Zoro? Is there a lot of other people in the world practicing Santoryu? I guess, like I said, Inuarashi can kind of practice it now. He's only using Nitoryu, but Inuarashi now has a peg leg sword. So he could easily pick up 2 blades and then use his peg leg sword as his own variant of Santoryu, so I guess it could have secret techniques. That's the technique he used against the Kraken. That was his first big Santoryu technique after the time skip, his big new one. And it's really cool. It's like he slices like horizontally and then shing, 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 the crossing of the 6 paths, which just makes me think of Pain from Naruto, but the 6 paths that also references Buddhism as well. And so it slices it like that, and then the Kraken's giant tentacle just gets cut into sashimi, like right there. So I really love that move. I think it's the only time he's used that. Actually, you know, in Wano, in the anime, there's those new cutaways that in between the commercial breaks, there's those new cutaways. The cutaway that uses Zoro, I think, has him using this technique, because the slashes he makes are like shing, do 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 do, and he does that. So I think it's in the cutaway. Kokujo o Tatsumaki, we talked about that. Rengoku Onigiri, talked about that. Ultra Gari. It's Ultra Tiger Hunt, because Ultra, Tora means tigers, so Ultra, that's the pun. Ultra Tiger Hunt. He uses that to clash with the dragon at Punk Hazard. The dragon's coming at him with his giant fangs, and Zoro's like, Ultra Gari! And it clashes with that a little bit, and then it just uses his Itoryu to slice its head off. Senhachiju pound a hole, that's 1080 pound a hole, and then the Ichidai San Sendai Sen Sekai. I believe that covers all the Santoryu techniques that he utilizes in the story. I think I'll just end it out with that, because once you go Ichidai San Sendai Sen Sekai, you really can't build up beyond that, unless he adds some more Daisen Sekais to it, you know? He adds, like, 4, 5, 6 Sekais, all the Sekais, all the worlds. But yeah, that's Zoro's staple, alright? And for a long time now, in Wano, like, as soon as we get to Wano, he gets Shusui stolen from him, Gets Shusui stolen from him. So for a good chunk of Wano, he was stuck using 2 swords, or that one time he used 2 swords and a scythe against freaking, Kamuzo there, or Killer. But now he's finally got 3 swords, he's got Enma, and we've seen him busting them out so far. He's not afraid to use Enma, he seems to have a pretty good handle on it. But, yeah, who's all for him using an Ichidai San Sendai Sen Sekai against Kaido? It won't be the same epic moment, because you don't have Orlumbus to chuck him at, hey, Orlumbus, throw me at Kaido! Okay! He just shows up the Grand Fleet, like, as soon as the Grand Fleet shows up, Zoro immediately starts making a beeline for Orlumbus, like, oh, we gotta do that cool technique again! He's like, oh, hi there, Zoro, we came here to help. Yeah, that's great. Throw me at freaking the giant dragon in the sky. Okay, Admiral Killer Bowling! Alright, Ichidai San Sendai Sekai! That would be cool. Yeah, with the Grand Fleet to show up just for that reason and that reason alone, alright? I guess you could also have other people, like, you could have Kid make a giant robotic arm and just, add Zoro to that in, like, a launch pad and just, like, throw him off like that. Even Law could probably use his Shamburuzu, like, room, and then, like, tact. The technique that he used to, like, reverse gravity and, like, lift up the warship at Punk Hazard. He just, like, room, and then tact, and then just fire off Zoro like a freaking bullet at Kaido. Damn, that would be cool, right? Okay, and he's also got to fight against King. So we're going to see some cool Santoryu techniques against King. But yeah, that's this video. Let me know below what your favorite Santoryu technique that Zoro utilizes and what you're excited for in the upcoming Battle of Onigashima. What is he going to bust out? What new variation of Onigiri is he going to utilize? How many more puns are going to be in Zoro? And how many Daisens can he Sekai? Alright, have a great night, everybody. This will be Tekking signing out. Sheep!